We are not our own. I wonder if that is at the root of the religious impulse, closely linked with the hope that, evidence to the contrary, we are not alone. I think these two confessions of faith, we are not our own and we are not alone, are the heart of not only religion, but of true humanity. So you see, there's humanity, the life form on this planet that is human, and there is humanity, our promise and potential, our capacity for kindness and mutuality. It is that second, and I would argue higher definition of the word that will be central to our discussion today. This is not new material for us. We talk about community and covenant all the time. It's how we understand ourselves in this gathering of people. It's also what we've been talking about during the month of August, as we sought close encounters with the sacred in many contexts. Unitarian minister A. Powell Davies famously said that the purpose of religion is to grow our souls. But we don't just do that to have a lovely, plump, and juicy soul. Our personal growth prepares us for engagement in the world and with one another in countercultural, covenantal ways. Although the process is sequential, it is not linear. Let me explain. The process of growing souls and engaged living is a two-step sequential process, and it repeats. We grow our souls a little bit, say through personal reflection, a close encounter with the sacred, reading or hearing something that inspires us. And then we take what we have learned or acquired and we give it life through our covenantal engagement with one another and our compassionate engagement with the world. The process is repeating because those forms of engagement often create opportunities for more soul growth, which leads to more engagement, and so on. As we grow our own humanity, we help to make the world more humane. If we stop short of sharing through engagement, we just become bloated with self-importance and false humility. We become kind of like the student in the Buddhist parable who approaches a master to learn, but the student kind of feels like they've already got this thing licked. The master invites the student to join him for tea, and as the student pours the master's cup, the master continues talking and does not indicate that the student should stop pouring. As the tea sloshes over the cup, the student becomes really anxious and finally can't contain himself any longer. "Why didn't you stop me from pouring? The cup is full." The master nods sagely and replies, "As are you. You come to me for teaching, but your cup is already full, and you are full of yourself. If you would be filled with new wisdom, you must come with an empty cup." It is my belief that as we gather together, whether it is in worship on Sunday, or in small group conversations, or working together on projects like the Little Free Pantry, or teaching and faith development, or being part of any of the teams and committees that make this place work, when we do that, we fill our cups. We fill our cups with hope and compassion and a reason for being. And then we take all that yummy goodness, that hope, that compassion, and we take it out into the world because we're changed by our interactions together. All that hope can't help but change us. We might be just a tiny bit steadier in a world that sometimes wobbles. We might feel a little less anxious or be a little less cranky with crazy drivers, which is my personal thing that I have to work on. And I would just like to note that when you're out there with that cup of hope and compassion, that you think about if that were a cup of tasty coffee, and you offered that to someone and they said, "Oh, this is amazing coffee. What kind is it?" And you don't even hesitate. Of course you tell them, unless it's, secret. And then they can enjoy the coffee anytime they want. You can do that too, not just with coffee, with your cup of hope. Tell people where you found it. "Oh, I found that at the Unitarian Universalist Church out in Amherst." It's not proselytizing, it's sharing information. Think of it as directions to an oasis of hope. You are, in that moment, their GPS to hope. That is your invitation to go ahead and share. This is not a secret. Sometimes people say, well, Unitarian Universalism is the best kept secret. Well, stop it. That's not fun. I'm off script. We are not our own. I spoke a couple of weeks ago about how easy it can be to buy into the cultural myth of individualism. The lone wolf, the solitary cowboy on the high plains, silhouetted by the setting sun. So many of our cultural icons reinforce this mythos of strength in solitude, and it's patently untrue. Of course we need solitude, but our survival is linked to our ability to be in community. Even if you live in a hut, all by yourself, 100 miles from your nearest neighbor, you still are not self-derived nor self-sustaining. You are in relationship with the life around you. We are made for community. This isn't a quiz, but maybe you had an opportunity to read my article, my column in the newsletter. But this is not a quiz. I'm going to tell you what it said if you're thinking, oh, there was a newsletter? By the way, there are printed copies in the lobby, and you also get it online. But in my column, I made some pretty bold claims and promises about what we aspire to be here. And since I promised it's not a quiz, I'll read what I wrote. You've heard the African adage that it takes a village to raise a child. Here at UUCA, we strive to be the village where you know you belong and where you gain the skills you need to be a force for good in the world. We'll help you uncover your gifts and to have the courage to share those gifts for the benefit of all life. It takes all of us to create a village that values and supports each one in our journey to wholeness. So that's a lot of words. And maybe it just sounds like blah, blah, blah in paragraph form. So let's just investigate those claims, because they all kind of ran together. We strive to be the village where you know you belong. Belonging is a big word. Where you gain the skills you need to be a force for good in the world. We'll help you uncover your gifts and to have the courage to share those gifts for the benefit of all life. So why a village? Because this is a social structure that figures prominently in folk tales and parables, it's familiar to us. Villages are small, so it is possible to know others and to be known. Being known and accepted for who we are is central to that big sense of belonging. Because villages are small and people are known, each is given responsibilities in alignment with their gifts and skills. And those gifts and skills are shared freely and taught to others in the village. In this village, not only is each person encouraged to bring their gifts, but to acquire new ones that will benefit the world beyond the village. What's more, villages are multi-generational, unless you live in a gated village that is separated by age or income or some other criteria. Happily, this is not such a place. This is a multi-generational village. Old and young and in between live and work together, learning from one another, appreciating one another, and being responsible for one another. In a village, resources are shared and there is reciprocity among neighbors. So you'll notice some things missing from my description of this village. Not everyone thinks the same, but of course that's not a requirement for citizenship. Probably not everyone likes the same music or likes their eggs cooked the same way. There is still room for individuality, and excellence and individual achievement is still celebrated. Although each person is encouraged to reach their fullest potential, there is no expectation that that will manifest the same way among us. Encouraging and celebrating individuality is a far cry from the rugged individualism that says, my way or the highway, I'm right, you're wrong. Do villagers sometimes slip into this way of thinking? Well, yeah, we're human. But in this village, rather than calling people out, we aspire to call people in, back in to covenant, restoring relationships. That's not easy work, and frankly, we haven't always been really good at it. We're learning all the time how to do this. And it's even more complicated when you think about the fact that most people in this particular little village came from somewhere else, came from a village that might not have been so open or encouraged that level of individuality, that maybe rather than celebrating difference, demanded conformity of belief or behavior. And you can see there's all kinds of possibility for conflict with all of that difference. What makes this village unique is that each one makes the choice to stay, even if they were born here. Each one is invited to choose. Each one is invited into covenantal relationship, which is a promissory exchange that holds each one to strive to be their best and to be willing to be called in if they slip into less than their best. And all are free to come and go with no degrading insults or promises of eternal punishment. In my newsletter column, I began by saying that my constant question to myself and how we do ministry together is what makes this church different? What do we have to offer in what more and more people are referring to as a post-Christian world, when church-going is at an all-time low? People aren't necessarily looking for a new religion. I think in addition to freedom of belief, which was the reason for many who have come into Unitarian Universalism and have stayed, that we offer a place of deep connection and belonging that is not tied to ideological homogeneity. We need not think alike to love alike. You know, we're pretty good at not thinking alike. Sometimes we scratch our heads a bit when we find out what the person next to us thinks, believes, or subscribes in. Where we have some unrealized potential is in really learning to shine by loving one another, even with all those differences, that diversity of beliefs and practices. Loving one another into wholeness so that we can take that love out into the world. That's what I see as our greatest gift and our greatest reason for coming together. Finding wholeness is possible, certainly, in solitude, but it is often fuller and deeper and certainly tested more often when rooted in community, in a village. So it happened in this village that one of the elders was having a birthday. It may have even been his 80th birthday. Who knows? This elder was so beloved that everyone referred to him as grandfather, even the people that were the same age as him, because he had so much wisdom and so much love that he had earned that title, that honorary title of grandfather for the whole village. And so as his birthday approached, there was quite a buzz in the village. A buzz. I didn't even mean to do that. No groaning, it's my story. There was quite a buzz in the village. What to get him? He hadn't even had a chance to unwrap all of the gifts from the previous year because he had been inundated with gifts of love. And so some of the villagers got together, sort of scratched their heads. What could he really appreciate and would show our appreciation for all of the sweetness that he brings to our lives? The sweetness he brings to our lives. Grandfather loves tea with honey. He loves nothing more than to sit on his porch and watch all of the activity in the village with a cup of tea, sweetened with a little honey. And then one of the children remembered that he has this big crock with a nice tight cover that's empty. It's just being used for decoration. Wouldn't it be great if everybody brought some honey? And this village, although small, is diverse enough in plant population that there are many different flavors of honey, depending where the bees have been. And so they thought this would be magnificent. All of those subtle flavors coming together. And so it was agreed. And everyone got together little bits of honey and brought it to pour into the pot. And a couple of the villagers were like, that's a lot of honey. And times have been kind of tough, and I have a car payment due, and so perhaps I'll add a little water. I'll add food coloring so it'll be the right color so no one will know. And it will help to thin the honey. It will be my good deed. And so the day came, and everyone brought their honey. And this villager, let's call her Jane. Jane, very proudly putting it up, thinking, I am adding what this needs, and I saved a few dollars. Everything works together for good. And so grandfather was very excited. He's watching all of this honey being poured in, and he's practically licking his chops. And so he gets a really long stemmed spoon. Do they have stems? What do you call the long part of the spoon? Is it handle? Handle. Excellent choice. English is sometimes my first language. And he stirs around. He notices it's not terribly thick. And he pulls up a big spoonful of the most beautiful amber liquid, and he's so ready for it. And well, it looks like honey, but it tastes like water. And Jane suddenly gets red in the face. Oops. And then she notices that everybody else in the village is looking pretty red-faced. Everyone had thought, well, everybody else is putting some in. It won't even be noticeable if I don't add any sweetness to the pot. Psh. Well, grandfather, because he was so wise, knew what had happened. And he said, I have another birthday coming up in a year. Let's try this again. And the next year, it was all honey. And it was really hard to stir because it was all honey, and that was wonderful. And he could taste all of the different wildflower essences that came from those various types of honey. And the villagers, who had been really embarrassed the year before, felt so gratified that together they had brought more sweetness by what they brought together and we're able to offer to grandfather to enjoy throughout the year. We all need to bring sweetness to the pot. Alain de Botton is well known for being a public atheist and writing about things from an atheist point of view, and he has this magnificent website. He's not the angry variety. I first encountered his ideas when I heard an interview with him online from an episode of On Being. If you haven't heard things on Being, I thoroughly suggest that you indulge yourself. So the topic sort of captivated me because he was talking about his book, Religion for Atheists, and his British accent caught my ear, but it was his openness and his humor that made me really listen in and listen closely. So in his book, Religion for Atheists, A Non-Believer's Guide to the Uses of Religion, de Botton makes a compelling argument for our need for the roles that religion fills, but not necessarily religion itself. I don't know how I feel about that as someone who makes their living in religion. But do remember earlier I made the comment that people aren't necessarily looking for a new religion, especially in this, what has been described as post-Christian, and I would say maybe even post-religious world. But they are looking for connection and belonging. And so I was so pleased that de Botton agrees with me on this point. He's so smart. In his book, he goes step by step through the parts of our lives that the culture is doing a poor job of addressing. Things like community, belonging, meaning-making, confession, atonement. Concepts that we have defaulted to religion, but are actually part of the human experience and help us to create that higher experience of humanity. Outside of religious gatherings, it is unusual for us to gather for ritual meals, breaking bread and sharing deep conversation, speaking of our fears and failures, our hopes and dreams. In what other gathering do we regularly come together to sing? When did we as a culture decide that only certain people should sing and everybody else should just listen? The visual and performing arts have the power to move us to reverence, to tears, to laughter, to change our hearts. And yet too often they are diminished as mere entertainment. Without shared experiences of love and loss, hilarity and remorse, we are stunted. We never become as fully human as is our potential and promise. Village life. Our little village right here on 11 acres of possibility and 160 souls strong can challenge and guide us in these paths to soul making. The fact that we're also a religious home simply means that it should be a no-brainer. Of course we create opportunities for reflection, for gathering, for singing, for confession, for atonement. We are a religious faith based in covenant, based in community. We're based in promises to bring our best and to seek restoration when we fall short. So we already have the big picture. We just need a way to nurture and foster connection. And that's the interwoven way of being of the village, the beloved community. So how do we live this? I turn to the second B of B and B, Brené Brown, a respected research professor at the University of Houston who has changed the world for the better with her work on shame, vulnerability, and belonging. I'm borrowing from her book, Braving the Wilderness, The Quest for True Belonging and the Courage to Stand Alone, where she uses the word and the acronym, braving, to describe a way to live in courageous, compassionate community. I've created a handout of what these letters all stand for that is in the lobby on the welcome table below the bulletin boards. So B stands for boundaries, learning to set them, hold them, and respect them. The challenge is of letting go of being liked and our fear of disappointing people. R stands for reliability, learning how to say what we mean and mean what we say. The challenge is not overcommitting and overpromising to please others or to prove ourselves worthy. A stands for accountability, learning how to step up, be accountable, take responsibility, and issue meaningful apologies when we're wrong. The challenge is of letting go of blame and staying out of shame, our own and creating it in others. V stands for vaulting, learning how to keep confidences, to recognize what's ours to share and what's not. The challenge is to stop using gossip, common enemy intimacy, and oversharing as a way to hotwire connection. I stands for integrity, learning how to practice our values even when it's uncomfortable and hard. The challenge is choosing courage over comfort in these moments. N stands for non-judgment, learning how to give and receive help. The challenge is letting go of helper and fixer as our identity and the source of our self-worth. G stands for generosity, learning how to set the boundaries that allow us to be generous in our assumptions with others. The challenge is being honest and clear with others about what's okay and what's not okay. Braving, being courageous and covenantal, is an excellent guide for our village. It's a way of being intentional in our actions and honoring each one's inherent worth and dignity in very tangible and real ways. And that's really lovely. And villages are so sweet. But what will this look like in our congregation? I'm so glad you asked. Every village is made up of neighborhoods, made up of people who may or may not choose one another if given the opportunity to sift for personal preferences. Les and I live in Cheektowaga, but more specifically in the neighborhood of Cleveland Hill. We chose a house and a neighborhood, but we didn't necessarily choose our neighbors. Next door, we have a news personality from a local station, and that neighbor is delightful, always friendly, always up for a quick chat. Behind us is the neighbor that reminds me a little bit of Wilson, the neighbor in the 90s sitcom with Tim Allen, the one that you never saw more of than that. He always has advice and observations to share. Luckily, he has a cute dog. Kitty corner behind us is the knife thrower. That's what we call him. Last summer, he began a hobby of knife throwing. And it was pretty entertaining to listen to the knives bounce off the plywood target, clatter to the ground. This summer, there was much less bouncing and clattering and more of the thunk of hitting the target. This could be a useful neighbor to get to know for the apocalypse. Would we have chosen this mix of people? Maybe, maybe not. But we have formed relationships with at least a few of them. We still don't know the knife thrower's name. Neighborhoods, by definition, are a mixed bag. So maybe your neighborhood is all people who look like you, and maybe you live someplace where there are many ages and cultures represented. This year, we're going to experiment here at church with creating neighborhoods, circles of folks who live in fairly close proximity, and then find ways to bring those neighborhoods together. You know, people that we may not know, we're not already friends with, but who share this village with us, the village of the UU Church of Amherst. So maybe your grandkids live far away, but there might be a church family that Oh, their extended family lives far away. Well, that looks like a possible connection, doesn't it? It seems like an opportunity for mutual care and engagement. All of us benefit from having a mix of people in our neighborhoods and in our village. We make friends. We take care of one another. And before you know it, we love one another, and we want the best for each other. We love one another into wholeness, and we take that love and care into the world, and we share it with everyone we meet. You never know. You might be chatting up your new neighbor. I hope you'll sing with me.